Hi, I'm Maria, and we're going to be talking about some common questions that people ask about grief. And before we start, I really love this quote by Amanda Palmer, which is just letting someone speak their truth can sometimes be the biggest gift you can give them, just to hold the space for them. And as a grief mentor, that's exactly what I do. I hold the space so that way you can speak your truth of what you're going through. And I'm here to listen and acknowledge the journey that you're on. So, getting back now to the questions that people ask is, will grief ever end? Well, grief is life changing. It really alters your life. And for most of us, grief actually devastated the life that we knew beforehand. And like many grievers, we sometimes put it into the before and after. Life before our loved one passed away and life after our loved one passed away. And so grief then becomes integrated into our lives. And this isn't a journey of all of a sudden there's an end date, because there isn't. Grief evolves, it changes as you do, which kind of leads us into the second question, which is, what does grief look like? And that is indescribable because grief is going to look different for each one of us. I think of it as a fingerprint. You know, our fingerprints, they are unique to us. We're the only ones who have it. We all have fingers, yet our fingerprint is uniquely our own. And that's what grief is. Grief is uniquely our own. There are going to be things that are similar, that are universal, yet how we travel that journey is going to be different. It's going to depend on the relationship that we had with our loved one, our belief systems, our thoughts, things that we grew up with, our faith. So all of these are going to impact how we grieve. And one of the things that is universal is that grief will affect us in our emotions, our physical aspects, our spiritual, and our mental aspects. And so some of the similarities may be the fatigue, how we're exhausted, the change in appetites. You might eat more, you might eat less, or not eat at all. There's a difficulty in sleeping. So these are some of the physical aspects that people may experience. There's the emotional, the sadness, the anger, the anxiety, the depression. So these are some of the emotions that we may feel, and it may be similar. The intensity is going to be different. We'll also have the cognitive. There's the confusion, the brain fog, difficulty in concentrating, and even making decisions. I remember after my son passed away that just the simplest of choices was so hard. I mean, things that I could decide of, okay, what can I eat today, took so much brain power so to say. And so a little bit about me is that my oldest son passed away in 2009 at the age of 27. Now, he had had cancer for 11 years. So I've also done the caregiving journey. And I don't even want to say anticipatory grief, because that sometimes is another question that people ask, and that people sort of say, well, you knew he was going to die. My response, we're all going to die one day. We just do not expect our loved one to pass away. And even if they have an illness, that expectation is not of they're going to die. And it could be our brains protecting us. I don't know. The expectation was from other people that I would have known that my son died. And I guess in their world, the grief should not have hit me as hard. And that's a misconception. Does it matter whether they've suffered an illness or if someone has passed away suddenly? It still is devastating to your life. And that devastation and how your life goes about afterwards is all encompassed in grief and how we deal with it, which kind of goes into that question of, how do I get over this? Well, I don't know why people think that grief has a getting over or moving on. It doesn't. How do you get over someone that you loved passing away? It's affected your life. So how do you sort of say, okay, I'm over it now? Because that's the new reality. The reality is this person that was in your life is no longer present. It's not like they've gone on a trip that you can phone them up. They are gone. And it's now finding ways of how to move forward with them not being in your life. And that is very daunting. It was very daunting for myself, in the sense of, how does someone all of a sudden say, yeah, my son died. Okay, life is now back to the way it was. Because one of the questions is, how do we feel? How does grief impact our life, our self-worth, our sense of identity, and even of how we interact with other people? I remember after my son passed away, a few years afterwards, I had gone to a course that I had signed up for. And there was this bubbly young woman who was greeting everyone, and she was so excited, and she was approaching me. And I could see that she was approaching me. However, I wasn't expecting for what she did next. She just went out and gave me this huge hug and enveloped me and welcoming me. And I froze. My body completely froze. It stiffened up. She must have felt it. Because everyone else, I guess, that she had hugged, had welcomed her hug. Here I was, being horrified that she had actually wrapped her arms around me. She stepped back, and the look on my face must have frightened her. Because I think it must have shown, like, how dare you? I was so horrified that someone had come up. Which leads me to my next question. How do you deal with someone that comes up to you and wants to show you maybe some compassion, some empathy, but they're physical? I suggest that people ask. Ask if you can give a griever a hug. Ask first before doing anything, because that actually shows respect for what they're going through. It actually acknowledges that they have had something tragic happen to them. Now, in the young woman's defense, she really, I might have shared that my son had passed away when I had signed up for this course. And now this was not a grief course, it was just a self-development course. And so she was really unaware of how to act around someone who's a griever. And so that is something that I think is very important to understand, especially to non-grievers, is that always ask someone whether you can give them a hug, whether you can pray over them, whether they can have a blessing, or if they want a blessing. And these are for my faith-faced friends, because even in faith, we sometimes feel that people are projecting onto us what they think that we need. And always ask someone what they need. So my next question that someone had asked is, what are grief activators? And grief activators are some smells, some things, a scent, a smell, a sight that reminds you of your loved one. And words can also be activators. And so an activator is one of the words that is neutral, because it is actually changed from another word that actually brought intense emotions from survivors who had lost their loved ones to gun violence. And so we really need to be careful of the words that we are using, because that can also be activating. And so what an activator actually does is that it brings up these intense emotions, and it brings us back to the place of when our loved one first passed away. And that could be just as simple as walking through a department store and having the scent that maybe they used. Or it could be a food item, a smell of a food that your loved one maybe cooked. Or even someone walking on the street or in a movie, and it reminds you because they look very similar to what your loved one looked like. I remember going to a massage therapy. One time it was an appointment that I had gone in, and the young man walked in, and I just froze. He looked the spitting image of my son. I even told him that. Now, the young man didn't really quite believe me, because it's kind of like, can't be the spitting image. I took a picture on my phone and I showed him. He was actually stunned that he could have passed for my son, or very close to his brother, that he would have looked like family related, like he could have been a brother, even though my other son looked nowhere like his brother, because they both looked different. And so that could be activating. And I mean, I had to stop going to this person. I think I only went once to him, and I apologized profusely. It was just too hard to take. And so these are things that can be activating. And so we then become aware of what's going to activate us. And the first times it happens, we're not aware of this. However, afterwards, when we do become aware of it, then we make plans of how are we going to do, or what are we going to do when that overwhelming feeling comes up. And that could be that sometimes you might have to excuse yourself to take a walk, go to the washroom, take some deep breaths, and acknowledge what you're feeling. And then choose, like I did for this massage therapist, sorry, I'm going to have to go elsewhere. This is going to be too uncomfortable to keep coming. And these are choices that you will make. And whatever you choose is going to be right for you. And now, one of the other questions is about, people always go, what are the stages of grief, or what are the theories? Am I doing grief right? I'm not following this. It seems like I'm wrong. Well, the first thing is there is no right or wrong. Grief is unknown territory, and how you're going to go through this journey is going to be your own journey. Now, these theories or models were an attempt to try to understand the grief process. And I use the word process because when you're looking at the 5 stages, it is a process. It's like, okay, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, little boxes to tick. Now, originally the person who wrote it to say about the stages of dying, and then it got converted to grief. Even someone who is dying, I cannot imagine that they're going to have boxes that they're going to tick off and go, oh yes, I'm going to be through stages. Or I think there's other models where people will have grief as a season. We have seasons in a year. It's hard to imagine seasons in grief. Again, it's almost like, okay, you're in this section here. When you're over that, you move on to the next section. Grief isn't like that. Think of grief as an ocean that is constantly changing, an ocean that is constantly moving. Oceans don't go static, and they don't have a box where all of a sudden it's going to be like today. Yes, we may know where the tides are. And when we look at grief, the universal section of it is that, yes, we go through emotion. So that may be what the tides are. However, when it's constantly moving, sometimes there will be flows and ebbs where it's just too overwhelming. And at other times, it's just a gentle tug. And that can change from moment to moment, from days, from weeks, from months. But there is no right or wrong in how your journey of grief looks like, or the path that you are on. And it's going to be the same thing with the emotions. Because someone may be sad, and in someone else it may show up as anger. It's going to be the same emotion. It's just going to be shown in different ways. And that's one of the reasons why I've developed a program, a 12-week workshop that's called A Path to Love with Grief. Because grief and love coexist together. It's not going to be the either or. It's not like, oh, but I loved my child. I loved my spouse. And now this is grief, so the love is gone. No, it's interchangeable. It's interminglable. Grief is because we loved our person. And it's the missing of their presence that is going to cause our grief. And 2 more questions that I'm just going to go quickly over, and then we can do a little bit more, is about where grief is stored in the body and when it hurts. So grief affects us throughout the body. It's not just emotions. It is body, mind, and soul. It affects all of us. And as I said beforehand, what does grief look like? It's going to look different for everyone because there's so many different ways that it can manifest. When it manifests physically, you can have physical body aches. You can also have immune issues or digestive issues. It can affect your throat. So physically, it's going to affect you in different ways. And sometimes we don't even know how it's going to manifest. Because one of the other aspects is that when we hold our emotions because we're trying to show this facade to other people that got it together, I'm fine, it builds up within us, and then it's going to show up in different ways. In my journey and in this path to love with grief, it's about breaking these molds that others have kind of entrapped us in. And it's to empower yourself to break free of these molds and to say, I get to express my grief, what is right for me, and to become unapologetic about being a griever, about missing your loved one. Because really, do you need to apologize for saying their name and for saying that you miss them? No. This is your loved one. And they affected your life. And you are missing them. And that is what grief is. And so that's what we go through about finding ways or discovering or exploring ways that help you in your journey, whether it's writing a letter, a journal, painting, music, movement, planting a tree, creating a legacy. It always comes down to love and how to honor yourself and your loved one. So I hope that you can join me in this path to love with grief. And check out my website at www.mariabalanek.com. And you can email me with any questions at hope@mariabalanek.com. So it's mariabalanek.com, and my email, hope@mariabalanek.com. I thank you, and I look forward to connecting with you.